Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
10 years. That's 3,650 days of secrets, inside jokes, and being the person they call first. But what happens when the biggest secret you're keeping is about them? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a story that many of us know all too well, the long-term friend zone. We're following the journey of two best friends who have been inseparable for a decade. But today, everything changes. We're going to explore the gut-wrenching choice between staying safe in a friendship or risking it all for a chance at love. Is it better to live a comfortable lie or tell a truth that might end the friendship forever? As we go through these 10 chapters, pay close attention to how the characters handle real-life social pressure. We'll also be looking at specific English expressions used for deep emotions, words like hesitation, vulnerability, and unrequited love. Before we start Chapter 1, tell me in the comments, have you ever been in the friend zone? Was it worth the risk to speak up? Let's find out what happens in today's story.
The morning coffee was a ritual that hadn't changed in 3,000 days. Julian sat across from Maya, watching the sunlight catch the steam rising from her mug. He didn't have to ask how she wanted it. He knew the exact ratio of cream to sugar she preferred. To anyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple, but that was the ultimate irony. For 10 years, Julian had played the role of the safe best friend, the one who listened to her dating woes. He was the anchor she leaned on during every storm, yet he was drowning in his own silence. Every time she laughed at one of his jokes, a small part of him wanted to freeze time. But lately, the comfort of their history felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. He looked at her hand resting near his on the table, just inches away from changing everything. He remembered the pact they made at 20. If they were single at 40, they would just marry each other. Back then, it was a joke shared over cheap pizza, but now the deadline felt like a ticking clock. Maya looked up, her eyes bright with a new story about a guy she met at the gallery. Julian felt the familiar ache in his chest, a dull pressure that made it hard to breathe. He smiled back, the mask of the best friend fitting perfectly, even as it began to crack. 10 years of shared secrets, and the biggest one was still locked behind his teeth. He knew that speaking the truth would be like throwing a stone at a glass house. If he missed, he would lose the only person who truly knew him.
The shift didn't happen with a shout, but with a simple, terrifying sentence. "I think I'm going to take the job in London," Maya said, her voice hovering between excitement and doubt. The bustling cafe noise seemed to vanish, replaced by a high-pitched ringing in Julian's ears. London was 5,000 miles away, a distance that their perfect friendship couldn't bridge with just a weekend coffee. For 10 years, he had operated under the assumption that she would always be a 10-minute drive away. He realized then that his silence was no longer a safety net. It was a countdown. If she moved now, the version of them that existed in this city would die a quiet, natural death. He looked at the map on her phone, the red pin dropped in a neighborhood he had never visited. "That's amazing, Maya," he managed to say, the lie tasting like copper in his mouth. Inside, his mind was racing through 1,000 scenarios, all of them ending with him standing at an airport gate. He saw the next few months flashing by, the packing, the farewell party, and the eventual fade into long-distance texts. She was looking for his approval, the one person whose opinion mattered more than the career jump. But for the first time in a decade, Julian didn't want to be the supportive friend. He wanted to be the reason she stayed, or the reason her heart felt heavy about leaving. The catalyst had finally arrived, wearing the face of a promotion and a one-way ticket. The anchor was being lifted, and if he didn't speak now, he would be left drifting alone on the shore.
The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow as they walked toward the park. It was their 3rd year of university, a rainy Tuesday night in the back of the library. They were supposed to be studying for finals, but the air between them had grown thick and heavy. Julian remembered the way Maya had looked at him then, a gaze that lingered just a second too long. He had reached out, his fingers brushing the hair away from her face, his heart hammering against his ribs. The world had narrowed down to that single inch of space between their lips. But then a phone had buzzed on the desk, breaking the spell and sending them both scrambling back into their roles. She had laughed nervously, making a joke about the stress of exams, and he had followed her lead. That was the night he learned how to bury his feelings under a layer of polite laughter. They had spent the next 7 years pretending that the library moment never happened. Now, walking beside her, Julian wondered how many other almosts they had stepped over like cracks in the sidewalk. Every time he stayed silent, he was adding another brick to the wall he was now desperate to tear down. He realized that their friendship wasn't just a bond, it was a museum of missed opportunities. The ghosts of their past self-sabotage were haunting the present, whispering that it was too late. He watched her silhouette against the streetlights, feeling the weight of all the words he had swallowed since that night. History was repeating itself, and if he didn't act, this ghost would be the only thing he had left.
The following week was a masterclass in internal agony. Julian sat at his desk, staring at a blank document that was supposed to be a work report. Instead, his mind was a chaotic workshop, building and tearing down the perfect confession. He practiced the words in the shower, the steam muffling his shaky attempts to sound casual. "Maya, I've loved you for a decade," felt too heavy, like a lead weight dropped into a calm lake. "I think we should be more than friends," felt too clinical, like a business proposal for a merger. He struggled to find the English phrases that could carry the weight of 10 years without breaking. Every idiom he knew, taking the plunge, biting the bullet, laying his cards on the table, seemed inadequate. He wondered if there was a word for the specific fear of losing your best friend while gaining a soulmate. His phone buzzed with a meme from her, a silly inside joke about a movie they saw in 2018. He stared at the screen, paralyzed by the realization that this easy, effortless digital tether was at stake. If he spoke his truth, the memes might stop, the late-night calls might vanish, and the jokes might turn cold. He was an architect trying to renovate a building while living inside it, terrified the roof would cave in. The rehearsal was exhausting, a mental marathon that left him drained before the race had even started. He realized there was no perfect way to say it because the truth was inherently messy and dangerous. He closed his eyes, deciding that the next time they were alone, he would stop rehearsing and just breathe. The silence was no longer a sanctuary, it was a prison, and he finally had the key in his hand. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. It was their mutual friend's wedding, a grand celebration of a love that seemed so simple and decided. Julian tugged at his collar, feeling the tuxedo constricting his throat more than the tie ever could. Beside him, Maya looked breathtaking in a deep emerald dress, her laughter mingling with the clink of champagne glasses. They were seated at the singles table, a cruel irony that felt like a spotlight on Julian's hidden agenda. Throughout the night, people kept asking them the same exhausted question, "When is it your turn?" Maya would laugh it off with a practiced, "Oh, we're just best friends," while Julian's heart took a hit every time. On the dance floor, the slow music started, a soft melody that pulled couples into intimate circles. Maya reached for his hand, pulling him toward the floor with the casual ease she had shown for a decade. As he placed his hand on her waist, the electricity of the contact made his breath catch in his chest. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her hair smelling like the vanilla shampoo he had known for years. In this crowded room, surrounded by people celebrating forever, Julian felt the wall between them thinning. Every platonic touch felt like a betrayal of the secret he was carrying, a spark in a room full of dry tinder. He looked down at her, seeing the genuine happiness in her eyes, and felt a wave of nausea at the risk he was taking. The perfect distraction of the wedding was actually the perfect pressure cooker, pushing him toward the edge. He realized he couldn't play the role of the +1 anymore when he wanted to be the only one. The music faded, but as they walked off the floor, Julian didn't let go of her hand for a second too long. The wedding reception faded into a memory as they walked into the cool night air. The silence of the suburban street felt heavy after hours of loud music and forced small talk. They walked toward Maya's apartment, their footsteps echoing in a synchronized rhythm they had perfected over years. Usually, this was the time for debriefing, mocking the bad speeches or joking about the dry cake. But tonight, Julian's voice was trapped in his throat, and Maya seemed unusually quiet beside him. The yellow glow of the streetlights cast long, flickering shadows that seemed to pull them closer together. They reached her front door, the final boundary before they would say their usual safe goodnight. Maya turned to him, her keys jangling softly in the quiet, a sound that felt like a ticking clock. "Are you okay, Jules?" she asked, her voice soft and laced with a concern that made his chest ache. He realized that he could no longer hide behind the mask of the supportive friend without breaking. The pressure of the last 10 years had reached a boiling point, and the lid was finally rattling. Keeping this secret felt like holding a live wire. He was being burned by his own hesitation. He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing the woman who had been his constant for a third of his life. The safety of the friend zone suddenly felt like a slow death, a way to lose her without ever truly having her. "I don't think I can do the best friend thing anymore," he whispered, the words hanging in the air like smoke. The casual ease of their relationship shattered in that instant, leaving only the raw, terrifying truth behind. There was no going back now. The bridge was on fire, and he was finally standing in the heat. The air between them turned to ice, frozen at the weight of the words he had finally exhaled. Maya's hand stilled on her keys, her eyes widening as she searched his face for a sign that he was joking. "What are you saying, Julian?" she asked, her voice barely a breath against the nighttime chill. He took a step forward, crossing the invisible line that had kept them safe for 3,600 days. "I'm saying that I've spent 10 years pretending that I don't want to wake up next to you," he said. The confession felt like a physical shedding of skin, painful, raw, and completely irreversible. He told her about the library night, the marriage at 40 pact, and the way every just friend's hug felt like a lie. Maya's expression shifted from confusion to a profound, quiet sadness that made Julian's stomach drop. She didn't reach for him. Instead, she took a small, instinctive step back toward her door. "Julian, you're my person," she whispered,
tears beginning to shimmer in the light of the porch lamp. "If we do this and it doesn't work, I lose everything. I lose the only person who actually knows me." He realized then that her fear was the mirror image of his own, but with a different conclusion. He had risked the friendship to find love. She was clinging to the friendship to avoid the heartbreak of losing him. The silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard, a void where their shared history used to be. She didn't say, "I love you too," and she didn't say, "Go away." She just stood there, mourning the simplicity they had lost. Julian realized that the truth hadn't set them free. It had simply placed them on opposite sides of a canyon. "I had to tell you," he said, his voice cracking, "even if it means this is the last time we stand here like this."
The next morning, the world was exactly the same, yet Julian felt like a ghost in his own life. He reached for his phone at 8 a.m. to send the usual "coffee" text, but his thumb hovered over the screen, paralyzed. For the first time in a decade, there was no morning ritual, only a deafening, hollow silence. Days bled into a week, and the absence of her voice felt like a phantom limb, a constant ache where a vital part of him used to be. He walked past their favorite bookstore and felt a physical jolt, realizing he couldn't just walk in and buy her the new release. Every funny observation and every work frustration stayed locked inside him, with nowhere to go. He was learning the hard way that when you tell your best friend you love them, you lose your support system at the exact moment you need it most. The great silence wasn't just a lack of talking, it was the total collapse of the bridge he had walked across every single day. He saw a photo of her on social media, smiling at a coworker's birthday party, and the distance felt like 1,000 miles. Was she relieved to be away from the tension, or was she staring at her phone in the quiet moments too? He realized that by being honest, he had forced her to carry the weight of his feelings alongside her own. The guilt began to mix with the loneliness, making him wonder if the truth was worth this crushing isolation. He sat in his apartment, the walls feeling closer than ever, staring at the empty chair across from his kitchen table. He had demolished the Friendzone, but he hadn't realized he was standing in the middle of the wreckage. The silence was a mirror, forcing him to face the person he was without Maya to define him. It was a cold, lonely clarity that made him realize he had finally grown up, but at a cost he could barely afford. He wasn't waiting for a text anymore. He was waiting to see if he could survive the person he had become.
The text message arrived on a rainy Tuesday, exactly 14 days after the world had shifted. "Can we talk?" "The park bench, 6 p.m., was all it said, stripped of the usual emojis and warmth. Julian arrived early, his heart a frantic bird trapped in a cage of ribs and nervous energy. When Maya appeared through the mist, she looked tired, her usual bright energy replaced by a solemn focus. They sat on the damp wood of the bench, leaving a careful, deliberate space between their bodies. The air was thick with the things they weren't saying, the 2 weeks of missed calls, and the weight of a decade. "I've spent every hour of the last 14 days trying to imagine my life without you," she began softly. Julian held his breath, terrified that the next sentence would be a final, permanent goodbye. "And I realized that the friendship we had was already gone the moment you spoke your truth," she continued. She explained that she couldn't go back to the safe version of them because she was now seeing every memory through a new lens. Every joke, every late-night walk, and every shared meal now looked like a chapter in a story she hadn't realized she was writing. "I'm not moving to London for the job anymore,"
she whispered, looking at her hands. "I'm moving because I'm scared." Julian felt a surge of hope, followed immediately by a sharp sting of guilt for causing her such turmoil. They weren't best friends anymore, and they weren't quite lovers. They were two people standing in the ruins of an old life. "I don't know if I can give you what you want," she said, finally meeting his eyes with a raw honesty. "But I know that I can't go back to pretending that nothing has changed between us." The lines were being redrawn in real time, messy and blurred, as they tried to find a new way to exist.
The finality of the moment settled over them like the evening mist, quiet and undeniable. Maya didn't offer a dramatic movie monologue, and Julian didn't ask for a promise of forever. Instead, she reached across the small gap on the bench and placed her hand over his, palm to palm. It wasn't the casual touch of a best friend anymore. It was a deliberate choice, heavy with new meaning. "We can't go back to how it was," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "But maybe the version of us that comes next is the one we were always supposed to be." Julian felt the tension that had lived in his shoulders for a decade finally begin to dissolve. He realized that the friend zone hadn't been a trap, but a long, necessary foundation for whatever was beginning now. They stood up together, not as two people clinging to the past, but as two individuals stepping into the unknown. The fear of losing her was still there, but it was no longer a paralyzing weight. It was just a part of the risk of being alive. As they walked out of the park, they didn't finish each other's sentences for once, leaving space for new words to be spoken. The architecture of their lives had been completely redesigned by a few minutes of terrifying honesty. Julian looked at the city lights and realized that for the first time in 10 years, he wasn't holding his breath. Whether they became a legendary love story or a bittersweet memory, they were finally living in the light. The long-term secret was gone, replaced by the quiet, beautiful reality of a fresh start. He took a deep breath of the cold air, feeling the ghost of his former self finally let go of the mask. The story of the 10-year friendship had ended, and the story of Julian and Maya was just beginning on page 1.
And so, 10 years of silence ended with a single evening of truth. Julian and Maya didn't get a fairy tale ending. They got something much more valuable, a real beginning. They learned that some bridges have to burn so you can build something stronger in their place. The friend zone was gone, and while the future was uncertain, for the first time in a decade, they were finally walking forward together without any secrets holding them back. What a journey! It's a reminder that honesty is the most expensive thing you can give someone, but it's also the only way to truly move forward. I hope you enjoyed this 10-chapter story of Julian and Maya. Before you go, let's look at 3 key phrases we used today that are perfect for your English vocabulary. To shed a skin. We used this in Chapter 7 to describe Julian finally letting go of his old role. A phantom limb, used in Chapter 8 to describe the feeling of missing someone who used to be there every day. To see through a new lens, when Maya realized her memories looked different now that she knew the truth. If you found this story helpful for your listening practice, please hit the like button and subscribe to Glisso. It helps me keep creating these stories for you. Also, I have a question for you. If you were Maya, would you stay or would you still go to London? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Goodbye.